Motorslice is one of the more frustrating games I've played this year, because I can see the great game inside it. When I'm slicing across these huge industrial walls, or in the sometimes serene soundtrack, I can feel it in the scale of the world. And every now and then, when the parkour works, Motorslice becomes the exact kind of strange, atmospheric action game I was hoping for. But then, the controls fight back. A jump goes in the complete wrong direction, sending me to my death. A boss becomes more awkward than exciting. The combat encounter plays out the same way as the last 10, or the writing just throws in a moment that feels like it belongs in a completely different game. In the end, I finished Motorslice in about 7 hours on Game Pass, and by the end, I was glad I played it, but I was very ready for it to be over. So in this review, I want to talk about the brilliant idea at the heart of Motorslice, the jank that keeps dragging it down, and whether it's still worth your time. And quickly, before we get into it, if you like what I do here, hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel really helps me out. Now onto the video. So first off, what actually is Motorslice? Well, it's a third-person parkour action game where you play as P, a slicer tasked with entering this megastructure to eliminate the machines and get out. The main hook is parkouring through this ruined megastructure as you climb up the levels, fighting various smaller construction equipment as you go, and taking on these colossal boss machines. P also has a chainsaw that's both used as a weapon in combat and as a traversal mechanic. You can use it to ride along walls, one-shot the smaller enemies, or slice along the parts of bigger bosses to deal damage to them. On paper, that all sounds right up my alley. It has a bit of that Mirror's Edge influence in the way it pushes you through these parkour routes, but with a more surreal, industrial, anime-inspired edge to it. And the bosses as well take heavy inspiration from Shadow of the Colossus. And as a pitch, I think Motorslice is genuinely strong. A stylish parkour game about climbing this massive structure, fighting colossal bosses, blending combat and parkour together, all to a surprisingly good, albeit limited soundtrack. That's a great idea for a game. However, the problem is that the idea is a lot stronger than the execution of it all. And to give Motorslice its credit, the reason this frustration hits me so hard is because there is really a lot here that works. The atmosphere is easily one of the strongest parts of the game. From the moment you start climbing this imposing structure, Motorslice has a really strong sense of place. Everything feels oversized, industrial, and almost hostile. There's a nice sense of progression moving through this structure, as every time you cross these giant walkways at the end of the level, you can look up or down and see the progress you've already made and what is to come. It gives you a nice sense of slowly fighting your way through something much bigger than yourself. There is some small hints towards the creation of these places, and they do evoke a lot of curiosity of what made these places. What were they for? What happened here? Many questions that I would love to get some kind of answer or hint towards, but at least from what I saw, it's very much left up to the imagination at this point. The music also does a lot of heavy lifting here for the atmosphere. It has this calm, chilled out quality, especially in the slack off moments. It gives you a nice serene break to interrupt the more stress-inducing parkour and combat segments of the climb. It works as a nice contrast in those moments. Some of the more memorable moments in the game were these points when looking at the structure sprawling out below me, taking in all the progression I had made. And visually, there are some really nice set pieces. Every time you slice across these giant walkways and get a glimpse of the upcoming area, getting glimpses at these giant machines you'll take on later. These moments are really cool, and that's the frustrating part, because it shows the Motorslice does have a strong vision, has a unique look and a really strong mood, and its central idea and mechanic helps facilitate moving through this impressive world. For short bursts, it can absolutely sell you on that fancy, but the longer I played, the more I felt like the world was doing a much better job of selling this fancy than the gameplay systems were. And this is where Motorslice starts to lose me. Because for a game built so heavily around parkour and the feel of moving through this world, it doesn't always feel like a smooth journey. The annoying part is, I don't think the movement is outright bad. Like, the individual parts of a good parkour system are there. When you hit a clean wall ride, chain into a jump, onto a rail, and fling yourself onto the platform you're aiming for, you can see the game working well and you can get into that flow state. And it's in those moments where the flow is uninterrupted that I feel Motorslice is becoming the game it's trying to be. The issue is, that flow never lasts too long. Sometimes I'd try to go for a jump, and P would launch in a direction I was not intending. Sometimes I'd try and drop down a ledge to get to a spot below, and she would just throw herself off instead. And once the game starts asking you to change the direction of the Motorslice to get up these longer wall segments, it really highlights how janky and fragile this parkour system is. A good movement system should feel effortless. A button press, a flick of this joystick, something clean. Instead, you're often fighting with the controls at every step and hoping the game does what you want it to. And that might sound like a small thing or a skill issue, but when the whole game is built around movement, those small amounts of friction add up fast. When this is something you're doing almost every moment of the game, it needs to be as player friendly as possible, especially when a mistake usually means falling to your death and having to restart a section. And I don't mind consequences in a game like this, but death should feel like a result of your mistakes, and not a gamble on whether the character's going to do what you want it to. That's where frustration replaces challenge, because it never felt like I was getting better at the game and mastering the movement. more that I learned how to work around these rough edges, and that is more adaptation than mastery. At the end, I wasn't thinking, wow, I've really learned and mastered this system. It's more like, I know how to avoid some of the ways this game can mess me up now. For a parkour game, that's a serious problem, because these games thrive on getting into that flow state and gliding through a level on instinct, confidence, and control. And Motorslice can have flashes of that, but it never lasted long enough in my view, always with an unintended response just around the corner to send you flying off to your death. The combat has a similar problem, but honestly, there's not a lot to unpack here. Motorslice has the bones of a combat system, but it's obviously not the main focus. You have a basic attack, a charge attack that I don't think I actually ever used, a parry, and for the larger enemies or bosses, you can slice across these yellow sections to damage them. But in practice, the parry by far is the most useful option, as you can parry most things here. Once you realize that, most fights play out the same way. Wait for the enemy to attack, parry, kill them, move on. And to be fair, the parry can feel good, especially blocking them reflecting the ranged enemy swords, but the problem is there really isn't enough around it. Most of the regular enemies die in one hit, and when I say most, I mean 2 out of the 3 types. The last one is slightly larger, so requires the slice to finish it off instead, but for a 7 or 8 hour game, only having 3 enemy types does make combat start to drag after a time, as you never really get any new skills or upgrades to your combat toolbox either. Every combat encounter plays out the same way, and the game never really throws any kind of twist to surprise you in this aspect either. There's no build up, no progression, no new interactions other than one instance midway through, but even this doesn't really change anything major. And in a shorter, tighter game, this may be enough, but for this length of game, it makes combat so thin that I became bored of it very quickly. The bosses are probably the clearest example of Motorslice having a cool idea, but failing at the execution. Because visually, they are awesome. They are these huge industrial machines, and when you first see them, they really sell the scale of this world. You get excited wondering how you're going to take down this titan of a machine. The issue lies when you actually get to the fights, because pretty much all of them play out the same way. Run up to the giant machine, quickly getting out of range of anything it can actually do to hurt you, and then just climb up it, slicing various yellow parts until the progress bars are full. That's it. They feel more like a climbing route than a boss at that point. There's no combat challenge here, it's more just of a big interactive parkour exhibit. Basically just slice the yellow parts, climb around, and repeat until a cutscene plays and the boss turns to sand. No parts being hacked off, no attacks that can hurt you once you're on the body, no smaller enemies to fight as you climb up. If you take away the health bar, then it basically would just be another platforming sequence really. And most of these fights were very easy because of that. There's no sense of danger once you got onto the body of the machine, and most of the time all that required was walking up to it and hopping on. You could literally just drop your controller, walk away, and you would have no danger present. The only time these fights felt difficult was due to the janky interactions that they were relying on, or the parkour system fighting against you. This is where a lot of that initial excitement for the game started to fade for me, because they have the great first impression, but end up being a rather hollow experience. These bosses could really do with more impact in the fights. Give me more destruction, more feedback. Add some danger to them so that once you're on the body, it isn't just a parkour segment. It's very much a great example of the issues I have with Motorslice. A great idea with big promises, but a weak execution that just lets down the whole experience. The writing is another part that did not really work for me, though I do think this is less central of an issue than the movement or the combat. A lot of Motorslice's atmosphere is genuinely strong. You have this lonely climb through a huge industrial structure with chilled music, strange machines, and little hints of an interesting wider world underneath it all. But then the writing often pulls in a completely different direction. I'm talking about the character interactions in the slack-off moments here, as that's really the only writing that goes on. As an idea, I like them. They could have been these nice quiet moments to learn more about P in this world, or to just let the atmosphere breathe. And sometimes you do get tiny bits of that, but a lot of the time they lean into more suggestive poses, weird fan service moments, or dialogue choices that just felt rather juvenile. It's not a deal breaker in the same way the controls can be, mostly because these moments are entirely optional, so if you don't like them, you don't really need to engage with them. But they did make the game feel tonally split. Like one part of Motorslice wanted to be this atmospheric parkour game about climbing an impossible machine, and another part kept pulling it back into something more awkward and out of place. And I think it kind of hurts the atmosphere they do such a good job of building up with these moments, where instead they could have gone more into the lore of the world, or P as a slicer and what she goes through. Instead, they have her take off her shoes, shove her feet into the camera, and give you an option to sniff them. Yeah, so while the writing was not the biggest issue I had, it did feel like another place where the game's stronger ideas were being undercut. Another problem is that all of this starts to wear the game down over time. I finished Motorslice in around 7 hours, which isn't too long, but it definitely started to drag by the end. After the first couple of hours, I felt like I had seen most of what the game was going to ask of me. The movement gets more demanding, yeah, but not always more satisfying. The combat never really evolves past the first introduction, the enemy variety is woefully limited, and most bosses come back to the same basic idea of climbing onto a machine and cutting through the weak yellow points. You do get a few new abilities later on, but they either arrive too late or do not meaningfully change the game enough. So by the final stretch, Motorslice has stopped giving me enough new reasons to push through the friction. There are hints of a more interesting world here, I definitely wanted a stronger payoff for all that effort than the ending gave. It did feel like it was more about setting up a sequel than a satisfying conclusion to the game. So while 7 hours could be a good length for this kind of game, Motorslice definitely felt stretched for that length. And if you tried to go for all the orb collectibles, then that'd be a whole lot longer, for not much payoff to be honest. With the friction as well this game puts up, I was waiting for it to end a good while before the credits rolled. So where does that leave Motorslice? Honestly, this is a hard one to recommend cleanly. Because I do think this game has value, there are some good things here, the atmosphere is strong, the scale is impressive, the music can be really good, though there are only a few tracks and that can get repetitive, and when the movement does click, there are flashes of a much better game beneath here. But those flashes were just not consistent enough for me. The controls are too unreliable, the combat too thin, the bosses looked much better than they played, and the game never really evolved past the first hour or so. So my recommendation would be this. There's a demo available on Steam, so if you're drawn to atmospheric parkour games, then give it a try, because you may get on with the controls much better than I did, and if the mood, music and scale are enough to carry you through, there is a chance you'll find something worthwhile here. But I would not recommend going into this blind. And I would definitely not recommend if you get easily frustrated by awkward controls, repeated deaths, unclear routes, or combat that is very shallow. For me, Motorslice is a game that I'm glad I played and pushed through, but not one I would play again. It has the bones of something cool, and I'm interested to see what the devs make next. Hopefully they can improve and make something with tighter controls and better encounter design. But as it stands, Motorslice feels like a great concept trapped inside a very uneven game. Some of this could very well be improved in quality of life patches, so it may be worth keeping an eye out if this interests you. But other areas like the writing and lack of combat depth, I don't see improving without a major overhaul. And that's where I landed on Motorslice. A game with a great idea, some brilliant atmosphere, and a lot of rough edges that kept getting in the way. If you've played it, I would genuinely be interested to know where you landed on this one. Did the atmosphere and movement click enough for you to push through the jank, or did the controls end up fighting you as much as they fought me? Let me know in the comments. And if this review helped you decide whether Motorslice is worth your time or not, leaving a like and subscribing would really help the channel out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.